The ZIL 29061. This thing has no tires and no tracks. All it has are two giant metal augers underneath it. Picture a small boat with two giant corkscrews bolted underneath, and you have it. These augers, also called Archimedean screws, don't just crush the ground as they spin. They grab the snow, the mud, and the marshy ground, dragging the whole machine forward. The Soviet space program had a very specific problem to solve. Soyuz recovery crews had to be ready for deep snow, swamp, and frozen ground. So ZIL built a truck that wouldn't sink, one that could pull out the Soyuz capsules that brought cosmonauts back to Earth, when normal vehicles could not reach them. A normal truck would have just sunk and stayed there. This one could even move sideways when it had to. It was also amphibious, so after crossing snow and swamp, it could keep going through water too. That weird design came at a price. It couldn't be used on pavement because the metal screws wore themselves out on the road, so it usually rode on the back of a bigger truck and got lowered down only once it reached the actual job, which means the rescue machine had to be carried by another rescue truck before it could do the job. And for years, it really did pull cosmonauts out of the Siberian wild. The Steinwinter Supercargo 20.40. On a normal semi-truck, the cab sits up front and high. This truck flipped that idea completely. It came out of West Germany back in the 1980s, and the cab was tucked underneath the trailer. So low it looked shorter than most sports cars. From the side, it looked like a shipping container floating just above the road on a flat little wedge. The thinking was simple. Europe's length limits made every inch valuable, so the designers shrank the cab, dropped it down low, and turned almost the entire vehicle into cargo space. On paper, it made perfect sense. More cargo, less drag, a more efficient truck. In practice, the problems piled up fast. The driver sat half reclined with a whole trailer riding right above his head. Visibility was bad, the windshield was constantly filthy, and the engine kept overheating. And keeping such a weird, low-slung machine under control was anything but easy. Road testing exposed the problem quickly. It was perfectly built for cargo, and seemed to forget that a human being had to drive it. Ford's Big Red. In 1964, Ford was convinced the future of trucks might belong to turbine power, and Big Red was the biggest proof of that dream. Ford rolled it out at the 1964 New York World's Fair, painted bright red from nose to tail. This semi ran on a gas turbine instead of a normal diesel. It was basically a piece of jet-age thinking put on the highway. The turbine was aircraft technology at heart, so instead of a diesel rumble, it gave off a high, smooth whine. Even hauling huge loads, it ran smooth, strong, and almost vibration-free, moving heavy freight at high speed with far less noise and vibration than people expected from a truck. Ford fitted out the cab almost like a small home. It had a television, an automatic ladder, and a little kitchen with hot and cold running water. A working kitchen in a truck in 1964. From the outside, it looked like the truck of the future. But the whole dream had one enormous problem: fuel. The turbine drank fuel so fast that the project stopped making sense in the real world. Big Red toured for a while as a show truck, then vanished for years, till a collector finally tracked it down and restored it. The Antarctic Snow Cruiser. This is one of the weirdest examples of what happens when you pile too many jobs onto a single machine. Built in 1939, this giant was meant to be a laboratory, living quarters for a polar crew, a machine that could cross ice crevasses and even carry a small aircraft on its roof. Not just a vehicle, but a base that could drive across the middle of Antarctica. It rode on 4 huge, almost treadless tires, each one taller than a grown adult. And the whole grand idea had one very simple flaw: the tires. On a machine designed for snow and ice, they were almost completely smooth. Tires on ice. It is a bit like showing up to a frozen lake in bald racing slicks. So when it reached Antarctica, it mostly spun its wheels on the exact surface it was supposed to conquer. It was meant to be a mobile research base, and mostly ended up as a stationary shelter. Then it got buried in the snow, was spotted again years later, and finally disappeared somewhere into the ice. Who knows, maybe it's still down there. The BelAZ 7907. One of the most unusual military trucks ever built. It rode on a full 24 wheels. Every single one of them was powered, and 16 of them could steer. The Soviet military wanted it for one job: hauling giant intercontinental missiles out to places so remote and covered that satellites would have a much harder time spotting them. A load that heavy could tear a normal truck apart in no time, so the BelAZ was rethought from the ground up. The engineers threw out classic truck logic entirely. Instead of sending power mechanically from one central point out to the wheels, they powered each wheel on its own. A giant turbine generated electricity, and that electricity powered a motor in every wheel hub. The turbine technology came straight out of a tank, so even though it looked like an enormous military truck, it carried an electric drive idea inside it. But only 2 were ever built. When the missile program was canceled, it never got to do its real job. Later, one of them retired into an almost absurd second career, dragging a 100-ton vessel overland until the electric drive finally gave out. And as weird as that is, the biggest machines on this list are still ahead. The Berliet T100. This was a brute force answer to the Sahara. In the late 1950s, oil equipment had to be moved deep into the Sahara, and there were barely any roads. The loads were enormous, the ground was merciless, and a normal truck had no chance. So Berliet built a giant 6x6 machine riding on massive tires. Each one of those tires weighed about as much as a small car. Empty, it already weighed 50 tons, and its goal was never speed, it was getting through the desert. This thing was so big that when they wanted to show it at the 1957 Paris Motor Show, it wouldn't even fit inside the building. They had to set up a special space for it outside. But the real oddity was the steering. Turning this giant was so hard that a separate engine was fitted just to help turn the steering system. It wasn't fast, it wasn't practical, and it had no business on a normal road. Only 4 were ever built. But in the Sahara, it genuinely worked. It hauled gear across the oil fields and even helped put out a massive well fire. So, if efficiency isn't your concern, sometimes just building something gigantic actually does the trick. Only 2 survive today, one preserved in France and the other still in Algeria. The BelAZ 75710. Simply put, it is the biggest haul truck in the world. This thing can carry hundreds of tons in a single trip, and even empty it stands taller than many 2-story buildings. Its tires alone stand taller than a person, and just to reach the cab you climb a full staircase. It wasn't built for speed, or looks, or practicality. In open-pit mines, it exists for one thing: moving the most earth possible in the fewest trips possible. The weirdest part about the BelAZ isn't just its size. It is so big it cannot travel on public roads to reach the mine where it works. It's shipped in pieces, reassembled at the site, and spends the rest of its life on special mine roads only. It can't get on a normal road, can't pass through a city, can't go anywhere else. So the biggest truck on Earth is, in the end, the one truck that can't go anywhere. The least free truck of them all. The NASA Crawler Transporter. This thing wasn't built to carry ordinary loads. Its job is to move fully assembled giant rockets, standing upright, from the assembly building out to the launch pad. Its own weight is measured in millions of pounds. Guinness officially recognizes Crawler Transporter 2 as the heaviest self-powered vehicle ever built, and it rolls on 4 huge double-tracked units. The Crawler Transporter is not fast. It doesn't run, it doesn't rush. Fully loaded, it crawls along at just 1 mile per hour. That is slower than you walk. But speed was never the point. Balance is. Because when there is a fully assembled rocket riding on your back, the last thing you want is a machine in a hurry. Its entire purpose is to carry that rocket to the pad slowly, keeping it perfectly level and getting it there safely. It might be the most patient machine on Earth. It was built in the 1960s for Apollo, then carried the space shuttle, and to this day, it still carries NASA rockets out to the pad. So which one was the weirdest to you, and why? Drop it in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more truck content.